Crypto products and NFTs are unregulated and can be highly risky. There may be no regulatory recourse for any loss from such transactions.
Hello and welcome to ET Markets Crypto TV. I'm Miloni Bhatt. One of the big challenges we face today is how to make our world more fair, just, inclusive, and more sustainable. And how can technology help us achieve these goals? Many argue that distributed ledger technology known as blockchain holds the potential to perhaps revolutionize global financial markets, supply chains, but also aid in all sorts of humanitarian efforts and achieve some of the goals of inclusion and fairness. Today on Crypto TV, our focus blockchain for good. What are the challenges, say, in terms of reliability, scalability, and affordability, and many other things that we'd like to discuss with Pratik Gauri, who's the founder and CEO of fire.org. He's an advisor to companies and has been a speaker at many forums. Pratik, thanks so very much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Miloni, from the warm welcome. Thank you so much.
Pratik, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and the blockchain Fire?
Yes, so I've been promoting a concept of a fifth industrial revolution. That's how the name FIRE comes from. 5 IRE stands for the fifth industrial revolution. So I've been promoting that concept for the last 15 years to prove the thesis that you can actually make more money if you do more good to the world. So the more good you do, the more money you make. And to prove that thesis, what I did was I ended up setting up 8 multi-million-dollar businesses around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in the last 15 years. So ideally, for people who don't know SDGs, they're like global goals defined by the UN, which stands for, so for instance, SDG 3 talks about health, SDG 4 talks about education, SDG 5 talks about gender equality, so on and so forth. So whenever, in fact, when I use social impact, it's synonymous to the SDGs. So you set up businesses around the SDGs and was able to successfully mobilize millions of dollars towards impact. So, did that through different companies, different financial vehicles, use different models, and was able to successfully prove the thesis that you can actually make more money if you do more good to the world. So for instance, you can make more money if you use geothermal over coal. You can make more money if you sell electric cars over petrol vehicles, and so on and so forth. That was the thesis I was trying to prove. And I was able to impact tens of millions of people through this and generate tens of millions of dollars in the last 15 years. And then I found myself at an inflection point in COVID last year, where I was like, how do I scale this concept to 1 billion people? And how do I give the power back to the community? Because you cannot impact 1 billion people. You cannot, in fact, achieve financial inclusion until you have people involved in the whole movement. It cannot just be run by, otherwise it takes you back to the traditional problems of traditional finance, which are, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, but the problem doesn't get solved. So how do you do it? And that's when me and 2 of my other co-founders, we actually started FIRE, which is the world's first sustainable blockchain ecosystem, because we were actually, working with Fortune 500s before this in our previous journeys, and we realized that they were not very keen on working with the existing layer 1 solutions which have been developed, which are around proof of work or proof of stake. So what we did was we decided to launch our own layer 1 blockchain, which is going to be sustainable, because the secret sauce is it embeds 17 sustainable development goals into the consensus. So for most of the people who don't know consensus, it's the way any blockchain is governed. So currently, most of the to use consensus is either proof of work or proof of stake, right? So proof of work, as you guys know, it's like, whoever has more computational power gets to validate the block, right? And proof of stake, whoever stakes more crypto or whoever has more money kind of gets to validate the block, which again, it's great for blockchain to run the chain, but it's not sustainable because you're not energy efficient, so on and so forth, right? So what we did was we came up with our own consensus, which is now patented. It's called proof of benefit. And that's the secret USP of FIRE. What we've done is, as I said, we have embedded 17 UN SDGs into our consensus, and we have scraped data from 650 ESG sources, environmental social governance sources, directly from the UN. We put it into the consensus. So what happens is we have created an infrastructure or a layer 1, and if any decentralized application or any company or any government or any Fortune 500, anything that is being built on top of us now has to automatically align with the SDGs, because when they do so, they get financially rewarded. That's how the blockchain works. So there's a score which is generated when you use the blockchain. You get the sustainability score. So for instance, if Maloney, you use geothermal and I use coal, you get a better score. But that doesn't mean we have a nominated proof of stake as well. So it's not like we have discarded proof of stake, we keep it. But on top of it, we have added something called proof of benefit, which basically means we are moving at the intersection of purpose and profits, or we are moving at the intersection of blockchain and sustainability. And that's what the fifth industrial revolution is. That's how the name FIRE comes from. Anybody building on the infrastructure moves automatically. The whole world goes from for profit in the age of fourth industrial revolution to for benefit in the age of fifth industrial revolution. So ideally what we are doing is, through our whole ecosystem, we want to transition the whole world from for profit to for benefit and impact a billion lives positively. In fact, our end goal is to create a billion millionaires. That's the final goal of the blockchain that we've built. The ecosystem currently has 5 components. First, we have our own layer 1 blockchain built on Rust. So we use Rust as a language. And as I told you guys, we don't use proof of work or proof of stake. We use proof of benefit. That's the first component. Second, we have our own NFT metaverse marketplace. We're actively partnering with both Bollywood, Hollywood to launch it. Third, we have our own digital university. Now, the cool thing about digital university that we have is so we have we're partnering with YOL, AICTE and stuff to basically get access to millions of kids. And then we are basically sponsoring hackathons across India and across the world to train kids on languages like Rust, Substrate, Solidity, which are not, and because we have faced a dearth of talent when we recruit people. We're a team of 100 now.
For Web3, yeah.
Web3, it's I think the biggest challenge. In fact, if you were to ask me in terms of capital, relationship capital, human capital, and financial capital, the third is the easiest to get if you're working around Web3, but the first 2 aren't the easiest. So human capital has been hard for us to find, and that's why we launched our own university to train kids on Rust, Substrate, Solidity, and of course then ultimately recruit them into our workforce so that we can empower the whole economy from for profit to for benefit. So that's the third component that we have. Fourth, we have our own wallet. But the cool thing about a wallet is you don't need hexadecimal addresses. So it can be Miloni.fire, Pratik.fire interacting with each other on just mobile numbers, and all virtual assets can be exchanged. So that's the cool thing that we've done in the wallet. And fifth, we have our own venture capital fund. We invest in about 2 companies almost every week, specific to Web3 infrastructure companies, and also focused on sustainability. So with these whole 5, we've created an ecosystem. The goal is to actually move the world from for profit to for benefit and impact a billion people positively.
Okay, that was quite a lot, Pratik, and I read somewhere that you tied up with the Muzaffarnagar police. Tell us a little bit about that partnership, and why the cops?
Yeah, so we are basically, so there are a lot of things which we're doing with them. But first, actually, our testnet is now live, and we are testing with a bunch of government stakeholders, Muzaffarnagar Police, of course, being one of the MOUs that we've done. And we are developing a smart policing and a predictive policing system for them. And we are basically revolutionizing their internal IT systems into a more robust, transparent, and more accountable system, because you can, of course, in the blockchain, you can track everything from the source to the end beneficiary. So that's what we are doing. It's mostly smart policing to basically even track how much traffic would be at each junction. All the records will rely on the blockchain, which basically, of course, is immutable, and so that they can deliver services to the public more effectively. And even when you lodge an FIR, for instance, right? So people can actually track the FIR because everything resides on the chain. So there is no discrepancy. You can be anybody, the most influential person on planet, but then you can still be tracked. So, it gives the power back to the community. So that's what we're doing with them. And then we have signed for a lot of more MOUs, just extended to that, even in the US with Nebraska and a bunch of others in the same use case.
So is this functional currently, or?
Yeah, so basically we're testing right now because our mainnet is going to go live probably in Q3 or Q4 this year. We're live with our testnet. So we're testing on testnet, and even with the records, we are not tampering with the original records for now. We are basically playing with the duplicate records. And once it's tested, once it works well. So initially, for the next 6 months to 9 months, we're going to be doing a lot of testing on with IPS officers on police systems, IS officers on land registrations, US and other countries on agriculture, supply chain. So we are basically developing a bunch of use cases, and we're doing all on our test net. And once our mainnet goes live, then we'll make it public.
Pratik, one of the fantastic things about blockchain is that it brings transparency, accountability, and God knows that policing systems do need that. But do you think that societies, as complex as they are, can function under the 100% transparency?
A part of our blockchain is also a private blockchain that will not be open to public. So as you guys know, there are two blockchains, like permission and permissionless. So we're using both, depends on which, if you're working with government, we'll be using, of course, a permissioned blockchain. But I think it's very critical that the stakeholders, all stakeholders in anything should know and are entitled to all the details, right, when it goes from one part to the other, and they should have a available book that they can trust. And that's what we are experiencing in multiple incidents. So I personally think that it's great for businesses, yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay.
And they can function under 100% transparency, of course.
It's estimated that 60% of the world is online, 40% lacks connectivity. And the idea that you are really propagating is blockchain for sustainability, as you said right at the beginning, that you would like everyone to be involved. And it doesn't really mean anything unless everyone is involved. So do you think there is a real risk of creating imbalanced societies based on internet connectivity?
So I think that's a big challenge of the for-profit model that we've experienced in the fourth industrial revolution, and even with the existing chains, right? And that's what we're trying to solve. As I said, we want to involve the entire population, of course, because we're creating a movement of the fifth industrial revolution where we are moving from for-profit to for-benefit and involving 1 billion people in it, right? So the grassroots communities, if you see worldwide, right, they have done a phenomenal amount of work building systems and solutions, and everything has happened independently. Everything's been independent. Everything's happened in silos. I think when you think of for benefit, right, what we are doing with embedding SPGs into the consensus, I think it will unleash all their resources, right? And you can basically cater to the 40% population that's currently not being involved in ecosystem creation or economy. So I think when you talk about the imbalanced society, I think that was a result of Web 2 and for-profit paradigms that have been promoted. But when we use Web 3 to promote a for-benefit paradigm, I think that's the biggest problem that it will solve, where you will bring the other 40%, which has not been included, into the ecosystem, where you're trying to move the whole world from for-profit to for-benefit. And that's when you take them with you. And that's how you can achieve financial inclusion. In fact, with some of the stuff that we're doing.
But internet connectivity is more about, putting fiber networks in place, ensuring they have access to mobiles, laptops. No?
Yes. Yeah. But so you're saying that because 40% doesn't have access to connectivity, how would you put them inside, right? That's what but that's what I'm saying, that you don't need that's what we are doing with blockchain. You don't need internet for a lot of the things that we are doing. Like, you don't need, for instance, when the wallet that we've built, it will be directly linked to mobile, right? So you can transfer digital assets on from one mobile to the next, and
you still need devices and stuff, right?
Yeah. So I mean, of course, so then you need, of course, we'll be partnering with a lot of telecom operators to do that. I mean, that's what some part of that would still rely on how many people have devices, because you still need devices. But when you talk about in general about financial inclusion, when I talk about banking, a lot of the stuff are still unbanked. So we are going to basically make a lot of the unbanked people banked through what we're building here. Now, even when you talk about, say, Muzaffarnagar police, or talk about any MOU that we're doing with government, right, a lot of the people would not even have bank accounts, right? But now they have access to a lot of the facilities they would not have had with just Web 2, but now they'll have it. So I think it's going to be a gradual shift. I think this kind of change, there are two changes that we see, it's one is a systemic change and the other is a revolutionary change, right? So with blockchain, I think it will be systemic. It will take its own sweet time to bring the whole population on the chain. But I think as it happens, it will of course involve even more penetration of Web 2 as Web 3 also starts to grow.
Pratik, can you hazard a guess? When do you see that actually happening? Any time frame?
Well, I would say it would take at least 3 to 5 years. I'm looking at a horizon of 5 years. In fact, I've kept a horizon of 2030 because India or any country has to achieve the SDGs also by 2030, and Modi has been very very a big proponent of the SDGs. In fact, most of the prime ministers and presidents are. So as you unleash all your resources and I'm talking about big stakeholders like either governments or Fortune 500s or family offices, and we work with all three of them. As you unleash all resources, whether it's relationship capital or human or financial capital, I think the end goal is to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And a big part of our agenda of FIRE is also to help achieve that. So I would put 2030 and 20. And of course, one big part of that agenda is financial inclusion. I think blockchain is going to facilitate a big part of it. So I would say 2030. I'm looking at 2030 as the year by which we will see a lot of progress. But of course, it will take, as I said, 3 to 5 years. We'll see a lot of people starting to adopt blockchain, because even when I work with stakeholders like governments, right, they were very skeptical of using any kind of blockchain, and I don't think they've ever used any blockchain before. We partnered with a lot of the government stakeholders. So I think a big part of that also was because a lot of people are skeptical that it's not sustainable. And that is why most people did not use it. And whether you talk about the governments, or whether you talk about Fortune 500 companies or even impact family offices, I think they did not use it because of that. And since we have solved that problem internally from the core, where when you're adopting the blockchain, you're not just using its one part of advantages, which are of course trust, security, transparency and all of that, but you're also making sure that you're not harming the environment, because then that makes it a long systemic change which is more sustainable. So since we've done it, I think I would say 3 to 5 years is the timeline, but 2030 is when I would say that will be when most of the SDGs or most of the problems are going to be solved. I in fact look at blockchain as and even when you say blockchain is good, I think blockchain has the power or has the ability to basically solve most of the social challenges that exist in the society. So I'm looking at 2030 for that.
Yeah, that'd be really great. So talking about blockchains, there is a concern and a growing concern and a lot of voices about the lack of standardization and interoperability between blockchains, the ability to see, share, and access information. How do you see this as impacting the adoption of blockchains?
This has been a big problem for adoption, to be honest, when you talk about any of the chains, right? Any of the Ethereum or Solana or any of the chains, any of the layer ones that you see, right? And I think we have even solved and this is a core. So when I talk about two things that we've solved. So one is, what we've done is, of course, we're solving sustainability from the core, and that's our USP. But the second is, any other layer one that you see, any of the problems that they had, we have solved even them. So we're making even the Web3 technology better. So what we've done in this case, our technology is not just interoperable, but it's also interportable, which basically means if you're interacting with FIRE and you have Ethereum, you're using an Ethereum system and you're using Solana, so far as the ability, the consensus is very dynamic, which basically means that it has the ability to communicate with other consensus, right? So it can communicate with proof of work, proof of stake. So if Ethereum uses proof of work, Solana uses proof of stake, we're using proof of benefit, it can actually communicate with each other, which allows cross-chain functionality, right? To allow communication and the most important piece, collaboration between our blockchain and other blockchain that would exist. And that also means that there will be more communication between decentralized applications that are being built on different chains, different layer ones. So, and if you go back to the traditional Web 1, Web 2 adoptions, right? IT systems also had the same problem, but then these things came into the place and then these got sorted out, whether you talk about standardization or interoperability. But since we've done interportability, I think that solves most of the problems.
Okay. It's estimated, I was reading that 90% of blockchain projects fail. Why do you think you will succeed?
Well, again, as I said, because we have basically addressed all the problem that that can make blockchain fail, right? So, I mean, as a growing technology, it's a growing sector, right? It has great advantages, but it has a lot of challenges, which are unintended consequences of technology. We've solved most of them. So, like for instance, I'll just give you some examples. So we have a we are no fork updates. So we don't need, we are forklessly upgradable, basically, right? So even in PCs, basically we use servers to change any kind of update that's going to be coming in, right? So we don't rely on users, which basically solves most of the horror stories that you see with any of the apples or anything that happens. And most of the other blockchains aren't forklessly upgradable, so that we've solved that. We are way faster than most of the other chains. We don't even need, we have no code smart contract, so you don't need to be a coding genius. I'm not a coding genius anyway. So you don't need to be a coding genius, in fact, to adopt blockchain as a concept, as a technology in general. You can audit it yourself. You don't need third party audits, and some of these problems have existed, so we have solved them. And then of course we solved the big problem of sustainability, with which we are getting access to billions of people through large stakeholders. Like, we're working with governments. We've already partnered with Huawei. Um, and yeah, we're discussing with multiple Fortune 500s. We are partnering with multiple family offices to mobilize billions of dollars towards impact, and everything runs through Web3, runs through the chain. So yeah, those are some of the problems that have existed, and that's why I think 90% of a lot of projects fail. In fact, if you see, if you break it down into bull market and bear market, in bear market, most of the projects actually go down, right? And that's a big part, because they're not solving a problem at the core, and they're not infrastructure projects. And since we are an infrastructure project, I don't see that as a problem at all.
All right. And we wish you success. This is my last question to you, Pratik, and then we'll wrap. In a recent interview, Vitalik Buterin, who co-founded Ethereum blockchain, acknowledged that his vision for the transformative power of Ethereum is at risk of being overtaken by speculation and greed, some of which, I think you kind of hinted at in your earlier answer, but I'll just complete that. He says he can't do anything to stop it because it's a decentralized platform that shapes itself as per the will of its investors, builders, and its community. What are your thoughts on these dangers? The obscene display of wealth. Everyone knows when Lambo. I mean, that's a phrase in crypto, isn't it? There are numerous scams. There are soaring transaction fees that have all come to dominate this public perception of crypto.
Well, look, I would like to say, even when Web 2 came in, any change, right, is met with a lot of resistance. And you rightly mentioned, yeah, so there are, of course, a lot of scams happening. A lot of dehumanizing aspects in the blockchain space. I would say a lot of greed. There's a lot of greed filled entity that blockchain, more specifically, or maybe let me call it, like, say, Bitcoin, has come to represent, which is of course not true, but that's the image that has been created. And of course, every technology, every product has its flaws, right? And we are here to change that, right? I mean, any technology that gets adopted, it takes years to get adopted, and every time a new player comes in, they basically make it better. So, and that's what I think I mentioned in all of the last of the questions that you asked me, that that's a big problem. That the biggest problem that I saw when I entered the blockchain space, which was sustainability, which was exactly these problems that you spoke about. And these are the biggest problems in the crypto space or the blockchain space, where you're just concentrated on profits and there's no human angle to it. And also, now I don't think blockchain is just a fad. It's now become mainstream. And thus what's happening is we can use traditional systems to use it as a force for good. And that's what we're working on. We're working at the sweet spot of profits and purpose, or we're working at the sweet spot of blockchain and sustainability, where we're trying to cater all of the problems that you mentioned, whether it's concentration of wealth, whether it's innumerable scams. By the way, our transaction fees close to nil. It's very, very low. So we have catered most of those problems. As I said, when we entered, like, we started building Fire about 7-8 months back. When we started building it, the only reason that we were quickly able to raise, the first round that we raised was 21 million at $110 million valuation, just 3 months after inception. So we were able to accomplish it just because you had solved all the problems, like you mentioned, whether it's transaction fee or concentration of wealth or scams, a lot of the stuff. We solved all of that problem from the grassroots, and then we solved the biggest problem, which I think has been existing, which is sustainability. And sustainability, I think, will continue to be a problem if you don't solve it from the core. Even if you do charity, even if you put, there are a lot of protocols which have been doing charity, right? But I think that's very reactive. So there's a difference between solving a problem proactively and reactively. What we've done, I think, is very proactive, where you cater to a problem right from the grassroots or right from the consensus level. So then people basically are forced to adhere to it. And I think financial incentivization is the best way when you're trying to encourage a systemic change. But when you, even if you do charity, right, that's very reactive. So it can solve some of the problems, but it cannot cater to a problem from the root. It cannot solve the problem of, say, gender equality if you just give, some money to an NGO or whatever. So we're not encouraging that. We're actually encouraging you make more money if you do more good to the world, which is fifth industrial revolution. So I think that's exactly what we're solving.
Pratik Gauri, thanks very much for sharing all your thoughts on blockchain for good. And a lot of work is being done with blockchain currently. It is still experimental. Some of it is quite theoretical. The potential definitely has been seen, but there is still some way to realize the goal or even feel the direct impact. But we hope that with blockchains like Fire, they can achieve some of the goals of inclusion, fairness, and justice. Thanks very much for speaking with us.
Crypto products and NFTs are unregulated and can be highly risky. There may be no regulatory recourse for any loss from such transactions.